return tonight to the issue of the Smithy Tribunal report and the remarks today of Gerry Adams on the murder of the two RUC officers in March 1989. With us are John McBurney, solicitor for the family of one of the murdered RUC officers, Harry Breen; Padraig McLaughlin, Sinn Féin spokesperson on justice; Charlie Flanagan, Fine Gael TD for Laois Offaly and chairman of the Fine Gael Parliamentary Party; and Sarah McInerney, political correspondent of the Sunday Times. If you'd like to contact the programme, you can text us to 53131, place the word tonight before your comment, send us a tweet at #B or email us at tonight@tv3.ie. We start with a clip of Gerry Adams' remarks in the Dáil today.
I want to ask you, Taoiseach, if you will facilitate a full debate in this House on the Tribunal report. A debate, Taoiseach, that might avoid the incredible kind of statements that we've witnessed already this morning on News Talk from the leader of the Sinn Féin party, for example, who incredibly said that the two officers displayed a laissez-faire disregard for their own security. And I just want to quote what was said, if I may, Taoiseach. So when you have that type of laissez-faire disregard for their own security by both An Garda Síochána in relation to these two RUC officers, and more importantly by the RUC officers themselves, here they were in the heart of South Armagh, in the middle of a very, very severe conflict at that time, and seemed to think that they were immune to attack by the IRA. And tragically, as it turned out, for them that wasn't the case. Unquote. Thank you, Deputy. Now that's the leader of Sinn Féin's contribution to this debate. I think it's insulting to the families concerned. It should be withdrawn. And I think it also essentially almost blames, by implication, by the officers themselves. I mean, we should be very clear in this House. This was premeditated murder carried out by so-called Republicans, people supported by the Sinn Féin leader and others, and who continue to refuse to accept the reality that it was a premeditated murder.
I don't need reminders from the Fianna Fáil leader, but at the heart of this tribunal are two bereaved families. I've already said clearly that these were brave officers doing their duty as they saw it, in the same way as the IRA volunteers would see themselves as doing their duty as they saw it. Please let me finish. And I would remind all Choctaw here that, please, Deputy Browne, that all, last Concord, I'd remind all Choctaw here that all the main parties here came from that period of armed resistance that led to the armed proclamation of a republic in 1916. And some people here have really very, very short memories about their own role and the role of organisations that they may have belonged to in the past. Now, what I said on Newsweek, for the record, reflects the Smithick report, reflects the statement given to the Smithick report by the RUC and by An Garda Síochána, and also by the former IRA.
John, what is your response to the remarks of Gerry Adams?
Well, they have caused us quite some difficulties in that the families who were making sense and coming to terms with this very detailed report were confronted with the reality of Mr. Adams saying that there were competing or conflicting duties at play on the awful day when these fine officers lost their lives in this murderous attack. He refers to the duty that they were conducting, and he describes them, strangely, from him as brave. He then goes on to say they're conducting their duties, but that there was a conflicting and competing duty to murder them, and that others were carrying out a duty to murder two unarmed, defenceless senior officers coming back from a liaison meeting with senior guards. It was insulting, offensive, and quite outrageous, really, in circumstances where he begins by calling them brave. It's unacceptable, really, for those remarks not to be challenged on behalf of the family. I'm here to do that. I would criticise strongly the attempt by Gerry Adams to say that they somehow brought about their own deaths by being careless or by being laissez-faire. Their job description involves them travelling to meet their counterparts, divisional commanders south of the border, and a border superintendent who they met with. Chief Superintendent Browne was reluctant to travel. He had concerns, he had issues, he had worries. Superintendent Buchanan's job description left him having to be there 39, 40 times in a period of half a year or a bit more. That was infused with risk and danger. The law required that they not be armed. They had to travel down unarmed. They used private vehicles, not armour-plated or security vehicles of any kind. There was risk embedded within that whole arrangement. They didn't make the arrangement. They didn't create the protocols and the understandings that arose after the Anglo-Irish Agreement through the Working Party, headed up by very senior officers, and on which Mr. Buchanan served. They were consulted about it. The border superintendent role began, and these were the arrangements in play. There was no laissez-faire attitude. These were very courageous officers who were fulfilling their duties. Chief Superintendent Browne was the divisional commander for a very difficult border area to police, and he was doing it to the best of his abilities. No one should have taken upon themselves a duty to murder him.
Pádraig, do you think that the IRA personnel who murdered these two officers had a duty to do so?
I believe that the IRA were fighting a legitimate war. I believe that they were young men and women who had suffered at the hands of the RUC, who policed an apartheid, sectarian Orange state. That is the reason why today we no longer have an RUC. Earlier today, Mr. McBurney referred to the IRA as terrorists. My father was an IRA man. My father was a young man like thousands of others who joined the IRA. He spent 9 years in English jails. I can tell you, Mr. McBurney, my father was no terrorist. So many families are hurt by the conflict, and many families need to have answers.
What's so bad about calling somebody a terrorist? They inflicted terror on other people. Of course they were terrorists.
Mr. McBurney would give an analysis that the RUC were angels and saints, and that young Irish Republicans were terrorists. That's outrageous.
Is it your opinion that the people who murdered these two RUC officers had a duty to do so?
I believe that they had a duty as much as Michael Collins and the IRA of the War of Independence, as much as Pádraig Pearse or James Connolly, every generation of Irish people who stood up to oppression. And the young Irish men and women in the 6 counties who stood up to oppression had a right to take a war in the absence of political leadership. When political leadership finally came, thank God, those days are over. See, that's the context in which this happens, and Mr. McBurney would present one side as angels and saints. The RUC were a sectarian Orange state enforcer. They harassed and harangued and oppressed the nationalist people,
and there was a duty to murder them.
In a war situation, tragically,
a duty to
I
murder.
believe in a war situation,
a duty to murder these two people.
In a war situation, the same as the old IRA who killed almost 500 RIC members back in the War of Independence.
I think a lot
in
of
the
people,
same fashion.
I think a lot of viewers will find it quite chilling that you think there was a duty to murder these two people.
I believe that the IRA volunteers and the 2 senior RUC men, Harry Breen and Bob Buchanan, who were killed, were all caught up in a profound tragedy. There were no goodies or baddies. All of them were failed politically. And I will not stand back and let my father be vilified while others are presented as heroes.
Don't mind your father. Your father had nothing to do with the issue that we're talking about.
Yes, he was. He was
an IRA
man.
He had nothing to do with the point we're talking about.
Everything to do with the issue.
And we're talking now about your contention, Gerry Adams' contention. There was a duty to murder these two people.
I believe that the IRA war was a tragedy, but I believe that the men and women of the IRA deserve the same respect and stature as the members of the RUC, the UDR, the British. They were all human beings with families who were caught up in a tragedy. That's what I believe, and I'm not going to stand here.
There's a duty to murder Harry Breen, who came out of the car that was surrounded by IRA men came out of the car waving a handkerchief, there was a duty to murder that defenceless man.
I'm saying to you, and I'll say it again.
You think there was a duty to murder that defenceless man who was wearing, waving a white handkerchief?
What I believe is that the RUC were part of a state apparatus that oppressed the nationalist people in an orange state.
Just to deal with this specific question I'm asking you. Are you saying that there was a duty, not just that they were entitled to, but there was a duty on the part of the IRA people to murder this defenceless man who got out of the car waving a white handkerchief?
Every soldier and combatant in a conflict, yes, has a duty to prosecute a war tragically. Yes, that is the case. Just as the RUC officers had a duty to do their job. That's the tragedy of the conflict. But we're not going to tolerate a narrative that says that we had goodies on one side and baddies on the other. And we're not going to tolerate a narrative that suggests that all of those young men and women
utterly chilling.
were
I think that'd be... Charlie, what do you think of this?
Well, I found the remarks of Gerry Adams to be quite contemptible this morning.
And how about the remarks of Pádraig?
In the aftermath of the report, and I would expect that that Pádraig, as a member of Dáil Éireann, elected by the people, would have taken the opportunity tonight to distance himself from the comments of Gerry Adams.
Do you distance yourself from Fine Gael, from Sean McKeown? Sean McKeown, you're Minister for Justice, who was responsible for killing dozens of RAC men. Do you distance yourself from them? Do you distance yourself from the leaders of your the IRA who gave birth to your party? The reason why you're a TD today. Do you distance yourself from them? No, it's not. It's exactly the same.
It is
do you distance yourself from them? It's rank
here.
Hypocrisy to listen to this from you.
Are you going to deny me an opportunity now of speaking?
Don't be a hypocrite.
I'm not a hypocrite.
Yeah. Rank hypocrisy.
Listen, what we saw from your leader this morning is indicative of the fact that nothing has changed as far as Sinn Féin is concerned. That Gerry Adams, in the aftermath of the publication of a report that showed for the first time evidence of collusion in a brutal, cold-blooded, outrageous murder of two officers of the state in the course of their duty. And Gerry Adams, in some way, tried to make a case that these people were in some way responsible themselves for their downfall. I think, quite frankly, it's outrageous, and I think your comments this evening are equally outrageous as far as the matter is concerned.
Do you think that Gandhi and Martin Luther King
I'm not talking about Gandhi or Martin Luther King.
Your party celebrates Michael Collins every year.
I'm talking about the campaign of terror.
What about the campaign of war that Michael Collins
prosecuted? I'm talking about the campaign of terror that was by and large perpetrated by your associates in Northern Ireland and in this jurisdiction
every year at Michael Collins where he was assassinated. Every year you gather, it is rank hypocrisy. Rank hypocrisy. You would tell the Irish people that Gandhi and Martin Luther King founded your party. It is outrageous hypocrisy, and it needs to stop.
Did you ever hear Gandhi or
invoking the name of Gandhi
or Nelson Mandela ever say that people had a duty to murder other people?
Well, Gandhi and Martin Luther King were
a duty to murder other people.
Gandhi and Martin Luther King were advocates of non-violence. Fine Gael are brought into this place they are today from violence, tragically, and this is the story we need
I
to
never
talk
heard
about.
anybody in Fine Gael or in Fianna Fáil ever say that there was a duty to murder anybody in any circumstance.
So Michael Collins had no duty. So Michael Collins had no duty to be responsible for the killing of almost 500 RIC men, shot in the back coming out of churches, shot in front of their children. What about the people that were killed in the War of Independence?
Yes, but I never heard
duty, but not the duty of Irish Republicans.
I do not believe. I just repeat. I have never ever heard anybody say that Michael Collins had a duty to ensure the murder of these people.
So none of them had a duty in a war, and none of their soldiers.
Sarah, how much Sinn Féin were on 18% of the opinion poll showing that. How much have they lost today because of this kind of carry on?
Well, I can't say obviously exactly how much they've lost. But
what do you think?
I think they will have been done huge damage both by Gerry Adams today and by what Pádraig is saying here tonight. I came on tonight prepared to say that I thought Gerry Adams was doing Sinn Féin an awful lot of damage by his comments this morning, this afternoon. Like Charlie, I expected Pádraig to try and find some way to step back from those comments, to apologise for those comments, and to show some sympathy for the families of the two murdered RUC men today. I mean, Gerry Adams' comments this morning in terms of saying that these officers had a laissez-faire attitude to their own safety, it's akin to saying a woman who wears a short skirt deserves to be raped because she's asking for it. It's outrageous. It's unbelievable.
That's a ridiculous comparison.
Sorry,
ridiculous.
I think it's exactly the same.
Well, that's your opinion.
They were asking for it. It's what Jerry Adams was saying today.
Have you any idea what the nationalist people of the 6 counties endured? Have you any idea what the nationalist people of the 6 counties endured? Why they were led to fight that war?
So two officers
you walk through the Dáil every day.
To their place of work or who drive on duty are asking to be killed.
Okay, Sarah, you walk through the Dáil every day.
Is that not what Jerry Adams is saying?
You walk through the Dáil.
You interrupted her, by the way. You've interrupted her. Let Sarah finish.
And I'll come back then.
Let Sarah finish.
I'll respond when she's finished.
Okay, sorry. So to finish, I was going to say that as long as Jerry Adams is leader of the party, Sinn Féin will never be taken seriously as a mainstream party in Irish politics, because I think the vast majority of people, possibly Sinn Féin supporters included, would have been looking at what has been said by Jerry Adams today and would have been turned off, very disgusted, I think, by what Jerry Adams said today.
It turns my stomach.
Okay, can I think if the party, just finally, from a political perspective, just finally, I think if the party ever wants to be taken seriously in mainstream politics, they need to move away from the type of comments that we're seeing.
I have to say, this is absolute rank hypocrisy. Sarah, you walk through the Dáil every day. You see in the Dáil chamber the bus of the 1916 leaders, men of violence. You see when you walk in the door a proclamation of 1916 which represents a violent uprising. You see on either side of you Michael Collins, all the leaders of violence in the state that gave birth to the state. Yet you would say, because Jerry Adams or I would try to explain why thousands and hundreds of thousands of nationalists and why thousands of young men and women found themselves in that situation, who were oppressed by the sectarian apartheid state policed by the RUC. You never experienced that.
Sorry.
You never. So your opinion
Jerry
is your
Adams
opinion.
wasn't talking about any of that today. He was talking about two men who were killed when they were on duty, driving from a guard station unarmed. One of whom fell out of the car waving a handkerchief, and he was talking about the duty that two other men had to shoot one of those men in the head.
And
that's what he was talking about.
Have you never heard the phrase in a war, and no war, there's no such thing as a good war. Wars are absolute tragedies. Pains inflicted across the board.
It was a campaign
of terror.
It was a campaign of terror.
But Michael Collins was scandal, was he?
No, it was inflicted on families by associates of your party over a long number of years, caused mayhem, death and destruction in Northern Ireland.
It's very interesting, Charlie. Can you answer this question? You've just said me and my associates, right? The fact is that Sinn Féin represents the overwhelming majority of the nationalist people in the 6 counties were afflicted. How do you explain that?
I would have expected.
How do you explain that? So are they all wrong?
I would have expected Sinn Féin, in the context of the Belfast Agreement, in the context of the momentous change in recent times, I would have expected more from Sinn Féin than what I'm hearing tonight, quite frankly.
So what
I'm disgusted. I'm disgusted with
that's great, Charlie. That's great, because Charlie,
you would try and justify the cold-blooded murder of 2 officers of the state.
It isn't to justify. And I've just about to make this point, Pádraig, that we've heard over the years Sinn Féin people saying, well, you have to look at what happened in Northern Ireland in terms of the conditions that prevailed there and all that, and young people were sucked into the IRA and they got caught up in this thing of violence and all that. But it's different. You're taking a major leap into decrepitude by suggesting there was a duty to murder unarmed people, no matter who they were, a duty to do so. I think people will be shocked and disgusted, as Charlie has said.
Do you believe that Pádraig Pearse, James Connolly, all the people who served in the War of Independence, it wasn't their duty to serve? They volunteered. It wasn't their duty.
I do my best to avoid expressing opinions on this programme, but I'll make an exception in this case. I certainly do not think there was a duty on anybody to kill, to murder anybody else.
So you're a pacifist?
Except there are some circumstances where there is a duty to kill, where your life is in danger, the lives of other people in danger. But other than that, a duty to murder defenceless people, I think people will be just shocked.
So you're a pacifist yourself?
Well, it doesn't matter whether I am or not.
Well, that's okay. If
John,
you're a pacifist,
can I just ask
okay.
you, what do you think of this?
I'm really quite devastated by the approach that's been taken. I can't fathom it or begin to fathom it, to tell you the truth. I would ask this question: if Sinn Féin believes that there was a duty to murder Harry Breen and Bob Buchanan in the way that it happened, why did Sinn Féin support the notion of 3 former provisional IRA men I assume were men, coming forward to provide information, details, particulars to the tribunal, to assist the tribunal in trying to bring closure to the relatives of those who the president of Sinn Féin described as brave men, carrying out their duty. Why do that? When you then come along afterwards and say that our associates, the terrorists of the Provisional IRA, had a duty to murder them. Why did Mr. Adams not simply take to the witness box and say, there was a duty to murder these men, that's our contribution? Why go through this procedure and process of appointing an intermediary who answers interrogatories, if you like, questions about it all, which are then further probed by the judge? Then there's a face-to-face meeting with the judge's legal team, who worked painstakingly and tirelessly in trying to uncover all of the details. Then there was a pressing of these Provisional IRA former members, for one of them at least to give evidence. And the judge was very anxious that that occur. All of that seemed to be with the purpose and intent of cooperating with the tribunal to provide all of the relevant particulars and details in a truth recovery type exercise. It was an inquisitorial exercise, the tribunal. It was not adversarial. It was inquisitorial, and they were cooperating. Then, after we have the report, after we have the findings, after the president of Sinn Féin has stood in the Dáil and said that the men were brave, he says, nevertheless, there was a duty to murder them. And I thought, he can't mean what he's saying. This cannot be right. These words cannot truly be being said in the Dáil. And yet we have a Sinn Féin representative here tonight who has vociferously repeated it time and time again, with a whole range of other comments and references to me about what he thinks I believe about the RUC.
You just repeated it. You called the IRA terrorists yet again. Do you think they were terrorists?
Yes. The Provisional IRA, in conducting their bombing and murdering campaigns, were terrorists.
And what were the RUC? What were the RUC?
The RUC were the police force of Northern Ireland.
Now disbanded, discredited.
All right, even accepting that. So what?
Because once again,
they didn't kill 1,300 people.
Well, the RUC
didn't kill 1,300 people.
Why have the RUC been taken from the scene?
I'm just making the point.
Yeah.
No matter what you say about the RUC, they didn't kill 1,300 people.
Well, they colluded in many deaths.
All right, they
oppressed.
They didn't kill or collude in the murder of 1,300 people.
They certainly were directly or indirectly involved in the death of, I would say, hundreds of people. But just to deal with the points, because you gave Mr. McBurney a long run and you've interrupted me frequently. So I'm asking for a few minutes uninterrupted.
A few minutes? Absolutely not.
That would be great.
No,
even
absolutely
minutes.
not.
So you're not going to let me speak?
Not for a few minutes. You can't make
so Mr. McBurney gets free rein. I don't get free rein to speak.
You've already taken up more time than anybody else on the panel this evening. Now, proceed, but you're not getting minutes.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you for letting me respond. Okay. You've asked about the IRA cooperating. They cooperated of their own volition to try to help to provide answers to the family. But let's be very clear. The IRA clearly acknowledged responsibility at that time and contextualised why both those senior officers of the RUC were killed at that time. And I find, your performance here tonight to try to present, and you're a man who's lived in the North all of your life, a situation where there was a police police force who were lovely and decent and angelic.
He didn't say that. He never said that.
Well, he hasn't once. He's never once said a bad word about it.
It's not relevant.
So
it's not relevant.
It's absolutely relevant. It's absolutely relevant, because if we were to say that we have this Oireachtas, this Parliament, who pays tribute to men of violence all around the place, what did they use? Did they use paint bombs? Did they use powder puff to fight the conflict? War is a terrible, terrible, cruel business. I have lost good friends, close friends. I have feeling the hurt and pain of the conflict to everybody else. But I'm not going to sit here and have a narrative. I'm not going to have okay, Charlie. I'm not going to have a narrative presented that on one side there were good guys and angels, and on the other side terrorists.
That narrative wasn't presented.
That is the narrative.
It wasn't
Mr.
presented.
McBurney, for the second time today, describes young Irish men and women as terrorists.
Do you believe that the people who murdered these 2 police officers were brave?
I believe that, Jerry Adams today acknowledged that on both sides.
I'm asking you, do you think they were brave?
I believe that, I think brave is an unfortunate word to use in terms of war and conflict. It's a terrible, terrible,
but where did the bravery come into it? To murder 2 defenceless people. What was brave about it?
I believe
just tell us, what was brave about that?
I believe that what we had was Irish men in a situation on both sides, and that in the fateful day, and thousands of other days like it, who were all
with no
victims,
mandate,
all caught up in a tragedy.
No mandate.
Did the 1916 leaders have a mandate?
No,
Did the War of Independence have a mandate?
No
mandates for any of those conflicts.
Okay, so what?
Rank hypocrisy. Because we're supposed to pay adulation. We are supposed to adore those who used violence in the past, but criminalise and demonise those who used them in the most recent past. This has to stop. We have to have some honesty in terms of these discussions.
What has this debate and Jerry Adams' comments done for Fine Gael's poll ratings, would you think, Charlie?
I don't think it's a matter of poll ratings at all, Vincent.
Just making a point. Go on. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I think it has ensured, if it needed assurance, that the days of Sinn Féin forming a part, however small, of the government in this republic is a good bit further away today. I can't see that's happening as long as Mr. Adams and Porrick and the fellow travellers continue to peddle what we've just heard.
To tell the truth.
It's quite outrageous.
The unvarnished truth.
It's quite outrageous.
It's the unvarnished truth. And it needs to be said. There's hypocrisy compared to this.
A campaign of terror with no mandate over a period of 30 years.
In 2 years' time, Sinn Féin will be going to the election asking for votes for candidates who presumably all agree with you that there was a duty on the part of IRA people to murder defenceless people in Northern Ireland. This is what you're asking people to endorse.
Well, I'm saying to you now...
This is what you're asking people to endorse.
Well, can you let me answer the question, please? What I'm saying to you is my party are led by a generation of people who took us away from conflict. If you look at the War of Independence, after 2 years of conflict, the Republican movement split down the middle and we had a tragic civil war. Our generation that leads our party today took the vast majority of nationalists away from violence and ended those days. That's what we go to the people with a mandate upon.
That's true. And you did so on the basis of surrendering everything that not only Republicans stood for, but nationalists
absolutely not. We ensured the dignity of nationalist people.
Everything was submitted. It was an entire victory for unionism. You agreed with the unionist position that the future of Northern Ireland would be determined only by the people of Northern Ireland.
Absolutely.
That was the unionist position, and Sinn Féin has accepted that, so it's a unionist party.
Do you want me to point out what we secured? What we secured was genuine equality for the nationalist people of the 6 counties for the first time. What we secured was an end to the sectarian, paramilitary, almost Royal Ulster Constabulary. What we ensured were all Ireland involvement in the affairs of the 6 counties. But most importantly, I say it again, equality and dignity and parity of esteem for the nationalists of the 6 counties. That's what the peace process achieved. It's an honourable peace process. I've talked to people from all over the world about it.
I can't accept that. I believe there are other political parties in Northern Ireland who achieved that. I'm talking about the SDLP.
Okay, we've got to leave it. We've got to leave it there. We now go to our preview of tomorrow morning's newspapers. We'll start with the Herald. It leads with Nigella bites back. I only took cocaine 6 times. Ex-husband out to destroy me. And over on the left here, dealer's body cut up in Bath. And the Irish Examiner, families of RUC officers may sue the state. Adams widely condemned for appalling and nauseating remarks. Up at the top there, owner of Top Cork Pubs launches bid to stop IBRC selling loans to NAMA. And over on the right, Forbes Ireland is the best place for business. And further down, diners at Cork Soup Kitchen up by 55. Dinners at Cork Soup Kitchen up by 55% per week as donations are sought. In the Irish Daily Star, Nigella, I've been a snorty girl. TV chef's cocaine shame. In the Irish Daily Mail, the €16,000 cost of childcare. Struggling families say exorbitant costs are akin to a second mortgage. In the Sun, again, that Nigella Lawson story. Nigella, I did take coke. She snorted drugs 7 times, worn out by brutal satchel, puffed dope but not addict. In the Irish Times, Callanan rejects criticism of Garda culture. Smithwick Tribunal report claimed Force continues to prize loyalty over honesty, and everything we do is designed to establish the truth, says Garda Commissioner. Photograph there of Nigella Lawson. Further down the page in the Irish Times, Irish childcare costs prevent 26% of parents from returning to jobs. With us to preview tomorrow morning's newspapers are Louise Bayliss of Spark Campaign and John McGurk, a PR consultant and associate of Declan Galloway. You wanted to focus on the story in the Examiner, I think, the 2 stories in the Examiner.
Yeah, well, I think they're very well linked. You know, Forbes have come out this week and said Ireland is the best place for business. And they're number 1 from 6th place, I think, last year. And one of the reasons they say it ranks near the very top for low tax burden, investor protection and personal freedom. And linked to that, I think, there is a very strong link to diners at Cork Soup Kitchen up by 55% per week as donations sought. And, you know, you have to think, and the whole thing about philanthropy at the moment, where you're wondering about charity and, you know, giving to charity as opposed to actually taxing. We've got the Green Core, where the real tax rate is now being said to be at 1%. And, you know, Forbes is kind of acknowledging this, that there are loopholes where the real tax rate is significantly lower than what they actually declared is. And there are people paying the price for that, and it's people at the very bottom. And I definitely think the 2 stories may as well have an arrow thrown from one to the other, saying diners at the Cork Soup Kitchen are up, where businesses are thriving. Big businesses. I will say big business.
John, what do you think of that?
Well, I'm not entirely sure where the arrow comes, except from the idea that Louise seems to be putting forward that if we had higher taxes, fewer people would be going to the soup kitchens. I'm not necessarily sure those things are true. I think that if you had to give people the choice reading tomorrow's paper, would they prefer a story that didn't say Forbes announcing Ireland is the best place for business? I think there are an awful lot of people who are losing their jobs today in pharmaceutical companies who are going to be looking for new investment into the country. I think there are an awful lot of people who are in the long-term unemployed situation who would be quite eager to see companies from abroad encouraged by headlines like this to invest into the country.
If and I
don't see, Louise, how you can draw an arrow between those 2 stories. I don't. I mean, if you can tell me exactly how.
Okay,
this story,
I will, John. If you let me. If you see Forbes are saying that we're a great country to do it because we have a low tax burden, and then you know that our people are suffering, to me, they're very equal. You know, it's very obvious. You know, when a country comes in here, there are obligations on them. We provide an educated workforce. We provide, you know, the infrastructure, and people are paying for that. But now it seems people are paying not just with the hard work, but people are suffering. Well, you know, to allow us to be top, you know, if I stood out on the streets tomorrow and said I'll work for free, I will get every job going, but that's not good for me. Us getting 1% tax from certain companies, you know, it's great to get that type of business, but are we paying the price for it? Are we suffering? Is it really helping our country? Are we better with sustainable growth by, you know, natural organic companies in our own country? I think the SME sector definitely needs some help, but we certainly don't want foreign direct investment.
The answer to that question, though, unfortunately, is that you can put up taxes all you want.
It's not about tax.
That does not mean for one moment that money is going to go to the soup kitchen in Cork or to the people who are using the soup kitchen in Cork. The average person watching this programme knows how much their taxes have gone up in recent years, and they know that money has gone into the banks and not into the pockets of those who desperately need it. I'm not confusing the issue.
You're confusing foreign direct investment taxes.
The money that
went
was
to pay our
taxes,
national debt.
It didn't.
It is going to service the debt.
It's going to. You've changed the point now. You said
that's from the extra money that we're paying in taxes since 2009.
OK, let's look at the front page of the Irish Times. Callan rejects criticism of God, the culture. Smithy Tribunal report claim force continues to prize loyalty over honesty. It's pretty devastating commentary on the force itself, doesn't it?
It's very devastating, and you would only have to think about the points scandal just a few months ago to wonder, is that true? The whistleblower, which obviously I have my own history with, but you would have to think, and any of these male bonding clubs, and it is in the majority a male bonding club. Loyalty is valued over perhaps honesty.
I don't think the Gardaí are a male bonding club, but I do think there's a huge problem in the culture of the force. There has been for some time. I mean, you think back to the Donegal situation, you think back to the various the comments that were made. You want to talk about male bonding? The comments that were made a couple of years ago about a protester in Corrib and the response to that that happened. I think the Gardaí have some cultural issues there that really do need to be sorted.
Somebody's made the point that the difficulty is with Templemore, that people recruited to the Garda Síochána force are sent away for a few years down to Templemore, and they develop an esprit de corps down there. Whereas if they were able to do at least part of their courses in third level institutions around the country, you wouldn't have that bonding issue.
It's like the fraternity system in the university and the old school tie. Yeah, definitely.
All right, we're going to go to a break now, and after the break we're going to go to some of your texts and tweets, and apparently there's a lot of reaction to our discussion earlier on Gerry Adams' comments about there being a duty on the part of the IRA volunteers to murder the 2 police officers. Join us after the break. Let's go to some of your texts and tweets. Your programme is completely biased against the Republican movement during the Troubles. You isolate one incident and bitch about it like a complete hypocrite. And that's me, is the hypocrite, I think. Somebody else says, Pádraig is right. Read your history and stop being ashamed of it. You are an apologist for the occupiers. Have you forgotten Bombay Street? Bombay Street was the street that was burnt out at the beginning of the Troubles in August '69. I think it was in the Arderne area. It was a Catholic area near a Protestant area. The RUC were a brutal, vindictive force in a power with the Black and Tans. Yes, the IRA had a duty to kill RUC officers. Somebody else says, pity Sarah, Vincent and Charlie hadn't lived in the North and they would understand what Pádraig is talking about. That's Sheila. Well, I did live in the North. I lived in the North at the beginning of the Troubles, 1970 to the end of 72. Somebody else says, Carl says, is it not a war crime to shoot a wounded, unarmed man who has surrendered? Somebody else, Amelia and Ducky says, Gerry Adams spoke fact and nothing else, and as usual you give us another complete episode of scourging at the pillar. You're brainwashed and demented. That's me. Dolores says, give it a rest. You have no idea what happened in the North. You are a shower of hypocrites, and even the British understand why the Troubles in the North started. The Unionist extremists behave like the Ku Klux Klan. Somebody else says, ask Sinn Féin TD to discuss the duty of the duty to murder of army officers on Bloody Sunday massacre. In other words, the paratroopers in Derry on Bloody Sunday have a duty to massacre or to murder the 13 victims. Somebody else says, did the IRA have a duty to murder countless women and children with their bombs? Somebody else says, I was never contemplating voting Sinn Féin, but now I will never vote for them. That's John in Dublin. And somebody else says, I always voted Labour or Fine Gael. I was always a Labour or Fine Gael supporter, but now I'm Sinn Féin, and Gerry Adams is the right man to lead all of Ireland. That's from David in Kilkenny. Did you see you saw the earlier part of the programme? What did you think of it?
Well, I'm a firm believer in equality, and I can understand how inequality breeds violence, and that's what happened up in the North. However, I also believe in humanity, and a man waved a hanky, and his family are watching or could be watching, and that type of response has disappointed me hugely.
What do you think, John?
I think they killed, they murdered, they slaughtered, they robbed banks, they launder fuel, they don't object to British rule, they object to any kind of rule. And I think anyone who votes for them needs their head examined. And by the way, I think the next time you get tweets from those fellas saying how brilliant it is, how fantastic and how justified military actions are in a war conflict zone, you should perhaps ask them those questions while they are holding their Sinn Féin banners outside Shannon Airport protesting against other people's wars, because they're in favour of war when it suits their nasty little agenda, and they're opposed to war when it suits their political agenda.
What's so bad about robbing banks? Pity more people didn't do it, and might be in so much trouble.
It's time and I, Vincent, you and I can head into town right now and split the proceeds 50-50 if no one watching tells.
All right, just to go to the front page of the Irish Daily Star, the 16,000 costs of childcare. Struggling families say exorbitant costs are akin to a second mortgage. It's true, isn't it?
It's completely true, and it's for all families and low-income family, but especially for lone parents. And I would like to draw attention to what Joan Burton said in April 2012 when she stood in the Dáil and said the changes made to one-parent family would not go ahead unless she had the Nordic childcare system in place. May 2012 came along, 13 came along, we didn't have them.
Louise, do you think we could solve
That's it for now. For more tonight's programme, we're on to TV3.ie. The weather's next month tonight.